to gavel in.
Good job.
Good afternoon, evening, whatever we are, everybody. Welcome to our Lane County Budget Committee hearing, Tuesday, May 7th. We're calling the meeting to order now. And the first agenda item is committee business and election of our FY 24-25 chair and vice chair. So I would entertain any motion for chair. Yes.
I make a motion to nominate Bruce as chair.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion to the motion? Great. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. Wonderful. I'm going to hand the gavel over.
You're welcome, Bruce.
Have fun. Vice chair.
Having feelings about it.
Oh, you were going to make me?
Yeah. Okay, now the next item of business is for vice chair. So do we have any nominations from the Commissioner Beck?
Thank you. I have not asked this person, so it's open to acceptance, but I would nominate Holly Marconte as vice chair if you are so willing.
Sure. I'll accept your nomination.
Great.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded for Holly to be vice chair. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Welcome. Again, or still. All right. Very good. Thank you. Well, that went quick within our 5-minute allotted time, so that was great. So moving right into item number 3. Oh, that's a different list. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Whoops. Thank you. We're staying on number 2. I'm going to approve the committee minutes from September 28th of 2023. Everybody's had those? Everybody's read them, I assume? Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Seconded.
All right. Any discussion? All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Committee process.
Thank you, Chair Weber. So we don't have anything new to share with the committee, but you should all have a packet of information in front of you. So some of it, the SOS, the service option sheets have been printed for you, along with a couple summaries of those. Your agendas for both tonight and Thursday afternoon. So just let us know if there's any questions on anything, but we'll continue to bring you documents at the beginning of each meeting. That's what we have. So unless there's any questions on process from the committee.
All right. Thank you, Christina. Thank you. So now the part is the right one, okay. The budget message from Mr. Mokrohiski.
Thank you. You all are pretty good at this for only convening a couple times a year. And I also want to welcome our newest budget committee member, Greg Nelson. Welcome to the committee and look forward to working with you, and thanks for volunteering. This is one of the great processes that we have in Oregon, the budget committee process with the 5 commissioners and the 5 appointed residents. They come together, and I've always enjoyed this over the past 10 years that I've had the opportunity to participate in it. So I want to start tonight just by, again, thanking all of you for particularly the resident members of the budget committee for coming together and volunteering your time in this really important process. To our budget staff, of course, Christine Moody, our budget manager, Jennifer, Jason, Michelle, and Kevin on our budget team. They do so much of the work behind the scenes, and just really want to call out how phenomenal this team is and has been, particularly in this really challenging budget process. And then to the folks who are here in the room, our county leaders and officials from various departments. This is this budget process, the proposed budget process, is a team effort. So I have the honor and the duty of presenting to you the proposed budget, but it really is something that we all work together on, myself, the budget office, and our departments, to develop the best that we can, given the challenges that we have at the moment. So I want to thank all of our departments and leaders across Lane County for their great work and collaboration again this year. This has been a tough budget year. The next couple years are going to be tough. I'd call it a sobering budget. This is I've reflected a little bit. This is the 10th budget that I've been a part of here in Lane County, and one of the more challenging, I would say. I wanted to spend a minute and talk about just try to create some clarity around the budget process, because it's maybe a little bit intimidating. You know, we had a bunch of people earlier this morning, public comment at our board meeting, and then the board had a work session this afternoon on the charter review, and boy, the BCC conference room was packed with folks interested, and I kind of jokingly at the end said, come to our budget kickoff tonight. This process can be a little intimidating, I think, for folks, because, you know, we have this 451-page document that I know you all have read front to back. There's a lot in here, and we talk about our budget as one thing. It is one thing that encompasses this year for the proposed budget 33 different funds. That number can fluctuate in each year. I asked Christine earlier, we had a Lane Event Center debt fund. That fund, we paid off the debt in that fund, and so we closed that fund out. But we also added the Parks Levy Fund in this last year. So, you know, the funds adjust. We usually, you know, we'll add one or take one or two out depending on what's changing in the organization. But, you know, I like to share that as an example of the budget is one thing. We talk about, you know, this one big number that we have, but it is really a collection of, again, for next year, 33 different ways in which we organize, account for, and track the resources that we collect and those resources that we spend on delivering services to the community. I think as we've talked about in recent years, I still feel like a little known fact is that Lane County's budget is comprised of 60% state and federal dollars. So 60% of our revenue in these 33 different funds comes from state and federal dollars. 40% comes from local taxes and fees. It's really important. If you look at a city government, it's much different, much heavier reliance on local taxes and fees. But in Lane County in particular, where we've really looked to our federal and state partners to help support the things that we do. Sometimes the message about, gosh, we have tough financial challenges is confusing, because if you look 10 years ago, we had about 1,300 employees. Today we have over 2,000 employees. We had maybe around a $600 million annual budget. We have now over $1 billion budget. So it could be easy to say, well, how could you possibly have budget challenges if you've grown your workforce by 40% and your overall budget by more than that? But the reality is that within those 33 different funds, there are restrictions on the way in which we can spend resources. Very small amount of the revenue that we collect is what we call discretionary. It's at the discretion of the officials, the leaders in Lane County, the budget committee, and ultimately the board of commissioners that adopt the budget to spend in the way that we may want to. When we charge individuals and groups that use our waste management facility, we have to use those fees, that revenue we collect, on operating that facility. When we bill Medicaid and Medicare and private insurance to serve patients in our 6, now going on 9. We're adding 3 community health centers. I think just a decade ago we had around 2. We're now on the cusp of having 9 community health centers. When we bill for the services at our community health centers, those revenues have to be spent on serving those individuals there, right? And so you can think about that across the board. Our Lane Event Center, we collect revenue to spend on running that operation. It has to be spent on that operation, not on other things. So the area that we have discretion on are the property tax revenues, the general fund, which is why we end up, that's one of our 33 funds. But the reason we end up spending so much time talking about the general fund, and this is true really in every government, the state government has a general fund, the city governments have a general fund. It's the pool of resources that has the most flexibility and discretion to it. And so we struggle particularly, and I'll talk a little bit and have some slides that most of you will be familiar with about the history of the challenge and the constraint around some chronically underfunded services in Lane County. So I wanted to just set that context. One budget, 33 different parts, 60% of it on average comes from outside of our local community. 40% of it comes from the local community. There's a lot of restriction on most of those resources, very little discretion that we have to be able to allocate. And so that's where, again, where we'll spend a lot of our time talking about. I want to talk a little bit about, before getting into that, because it's very easy, we're going to get into details really quickly. And with this process, we'll be diving into details and discussing and debating implications of decisions that are in front of you. But it's, I think, helpful to start with the values and the strategies that we've tried to approach this process with. I've been, as many folks in the room have been, in public service for going on 25 years now, and I've seen budgeting processes go a lot of different ways, and probably seen it done more the wrong way or as much as I've seen it done the right way. It's always frustrated me when local governments or any organization is faced with a financial challenge and looks at spreading that pain across the organization, right? Because it to me sort of spreads the mediocrity, if you will. It assumes that everything is equal, and it's not a very thoughtful approach. We really have tried, for the last decade, we've done everything to stay away from that type of a process. Every year, we've faced budget challenges. And let me make a distinction. We face two challenges, two budgetary financial challenges, big picture, in Lane County. One is that we are chronically underfunded. We have a really small property tax rate compared, and I'll show the graph that indicates this later, really small permanent property tax rate compared to most other counties, but particularly when you look at our comparable counties, Washington and Clackamas and Deschutes and Jackson and Marion, we're the lowest by far of all of them. And so the one problem is that we have an artificially low permanent property tax rate, because we always relied on the timber revenue, and we all know the history of the decline in that funding and then the state property tax caps that went into effect in this kind of frozen place we've been in for, a few decades. But particularly in the past 10 years, the SRS, the federal funding has dropped off. So that's one, is we have this, we're underfunded. If you just look at particularly our public safety and general government services, the services that historically rely on general fund dollars or state dollars, like our sheriff's office, our district attorney's office, our parole and probation, our assessment and taxation, and other general government services, we're far below what most other counties comparable to Lane County is. So that's one, is we're chronically and historically underfunded because of the low rate at which we collect property taxes. Two is our expenses are growing faster than our revenues. That's more of a traditional local government challenge. You'll hear cities and counties and states at times talk about, our expenses are growing faster. Revenues only grow, 3-4% on average. But our expenses are growing 5, 6, 7, sometimes 8%, depending. It's a very simple math problem and a very complex, nuanced solution to try to solve it without big impacts to the community. So that's the task. The second problem is the one we're dealing with today and in the next couple weeks. And I'll touch on some things we're doing to try to address the first problem, but the first problem really cannot be solved through our budgeting process here. There's a whole other, I just had this conversation in the hallway with the sheriff earlier today. So problem number two is what we're going to focus on in the next couple weeks, is how do we make sure that we get our expenses and our revenue in line so we're not having to eat through our savings, our reserves, because ultimately the reserves will be gone and we'll be left with the same ongoing expenses. and the same lower revenues, and then we'll have to face some really big cuts. So what we've done in the last 10 years is really say, all right, we can use reserves minimally, right? Let's use them in a minimal way, only as a bridge to get to stabilizing the budget. But we have to chip away at the, if we can identify new ongoing revenue, great. But the new ongoing revenue tends to be for new enhanced services. So the budget process tends to revolve around how do we constrain, control, manage our expenses so that we don't have to make big cuts and we don't have to completely deplete our reserves. And the approach that we've taken in the last 10 years has been really to say the last thing we're going to look at are services and positions, employment in the organization. We want to focus on delivering the highest quality services to the community, being an employer of choice where people want to, we can recruit and retain the best talent because, gosh, we don't have enough people to do all the work we need. So we need the best people, and we got to invest in those people to get the best out of all of our folks so that we can do the best work possible. And part of that is sending a message to our employees that, you know, if you do a good job, you do your job, you're passionate about the work that you do, you connect with other people to solve challenges, and you're focused on solutions, not just problems, you do those things, you're going to have a place to continue doing this work because it's really important. So that continues to be our focus. We've done things and continue to around controlling our health insurance costs. It's a big pool of resources that we spend on employee health insurance. We've said, you know, if those costs are going up 10, 15, 20% a year, it's draining limited resources, and it's not enhancing a benefit to employees by 10, 15, 20%, right? It's the same benefit, but it's just, so we need to manage that cost. Same with our debt. Can we refinance our debt at lower, when there were lower interest rates? There aren't today, but there were in prior years when we refinanced, we prepaid debt to save those interest rate costs, the PERS side accounts, vacancy variance. You'll see all these different things we've done. We've asked every question, we've scrubbed every tool, every opportunity to manage those expenses as creatively, as innovatively, and just as smart as possible without having to impact direct services and employment. That's our value, and that's been our strategy, and it continues to be. The challenge as we headed into next year is that we are beginning to exhaust the limits of that decade-long strategic budget balancing approach, and we face a $7 million structural imbalance in the general fund. And so this, again, it's every year in the last 10 years, we have not had to pursue layoffs. We have not had major reductions, really even significant reductions in services. We've been able to enhance in some places. Public safety, we've added some rural patrol for a 5-year period of time. Those funds are going to start running out in the next couple of years, and we're going to have to contemplate what to do about that. We've been able to add a position here and there in the DA's office. We've been able to do some targeted strategic things. They're not fixing the problem in the underfunded nature of our public safety system in particular, but they're also not further eroding, right? They're dipping a little bit more into trying to meet the needs of the community. So that's been our approach, is let's get targeted in managing and reducing those ongoing expenses without impacting services and try to invest strategically in places that have a big impact on people's lives. But we are on the cusp of really exhausting the ability to do that. And you're going to see that in this budget. When I say it's a sobering budget, it's I would not call the reductions catastrophic by any means, but they are impactful. You do see a continued significant pressure on vacancies. So we're relying heavily on ensuring that departments are keeping positions vacant for a period of time for longer. We call that vacancy variance, just managing and controlling the flow of people in and out of the organization and how we capture the savings from that. It's a bit of a science, and our teams have done and continue to do a really great job at managing that. We're chipping away at the resources we have available for materials and services within our budgets, as we have in prior years, but you're seeing more of an erosion there, and you're seeing a reduction of, I think, 14.5 full-time equivalent positions on the net. About half of those are general fund impacted. We also have some sizable impacts in the Health and Human Service Fund, In addition, if you look at, is it 37.5% fewer FTE from last fiscal year to this proposed budget in public health in particular. So part of what we're dealing with is the post-COVID era, right? The reconciliation of all of this, counties were heavily relied on during COVID to respond to the needs of the community. And our state and federal partners recognized that and flooded us with resources to be able to meet those needs. And we did a phenomenal job of meeting the needs of the community. And we're praised for that work. But we are now past the pandemic, and those resources have been depleted. And so you're seeing a reconciliation with the positions that naturally were added and naturally need to be reduced from that work. So this budget continues to reflect our values and the strategy, but it does reflect a more significant impact on services within our departments. And we'll talk more about that as we go through this process. I mentioned that we talked about the general fund. We face a $7 million structural deficit in the general fund. Likewise, the other distressed funds of those 33 funds, the general fund, the parole and probation fund, the land management fund, and the health and human services fund. Those 4 funds are the places that, it was Parks. Parks was distressed for a while, and thanks to the voters of Lane County that helped support for the 5-year levy some additional funds to shore up what was really an underfunded set of services there. In parole and probation, we rely almost exclusively on state funding through the Community Corrections Act. And part of the challenge we've faced in that area is this continued gyration. And we are hopeful that there's some good news on the horizon. Now, with the Community Corrections Act funding, we're hopeful that through this process, you're going to hear from our departments about that Community Correction Act funding and that it may actually hold some promise in the next biennium. And that's good. But we struggle when we rely on funding from the state to fund services for a 2-year period of time, and there's additional funding that comes in, we staff up to meet that demand that's in the community. And then when those funds get cut or swept by the state, we have to make huge reductions. The need doesn't go away in the community. It's just that our ability to respond to it is significantly impacted. Land management is a fund that both parole and probation and land management are funds that in other counties, if you look at those other comparable counties to Lane County, guaranteed they all, or the vast majority of them, use general fund resources to subsidize their land management, they subsidize their parole and probation, and they subsidize, as we do, our health and human services department. But we don't subsidize parole and probation and land management with general funds because we don't have enough general funds to even pay for the really critical things that our community needs. So maybe I buried the lead here. I gave you a bit of the bad news, not all of the impact of that. You'll hear that from our departments. The general fund is structurally balanced. That's the good news. It's structurally balanced. We're not using reserves in the general fund to balance. That's really good. It doesn't mean that, and this is the challenge, it doesn't mean it's always going to be structurally balanced. Every year we face the same challenge because the expenses are growing faster than the revenues. So we will again next year deal with some big challenges. I mentioned public safety funding. We have 2 different pools of one-time resources that the budget committee and the board set aside in prior years, one for 4 years, another for 5 years, to enhance rural patrols, minimally, but enhance them nonetheless, both in West and Lane County. One of those pools of resources will expire at the end of next fiscal year, 24-25. The other one will expire the following fiscal year, 25-26. That represents about $12 million over a 5-year period of time, approximately. $12 million over 5 years that we invested in public safety that we don't have a replacement for currently. And so that's something that we need to contemplate, is how to fix that challenge. In addition, we've added a number of limited duration positions in the organization. ARPA dollars, the needs of the community through COVID. We created positions called limited duration. And we said these positions are going to be funded with this money that we know is going to run out. And then the positions will likely go away unless there's some other funding source that comes up. Many of those positions, some of those positions you see going away last year in this proposed budget and in the future. So that we have happening as well. And then there's just continued growth and pressure on the expense side. So this is all to say, this is not an uplifting message, I'm sorry. I wish that we could be here saying we solved all the problems and we came up with $40 million more for our public safety system and we can all celebrate. But we have some hard decisions and a tough task in front of us to, again, try to manage this and continue to chip away at our expenses, right? We have to, the belt tightening, we got to tighten to the right level that doesn't cut off the circulation. So let's go to the slides here. We have a couple slides. And you all, I think, have seen these slides. These will not be, but it's really just important. Again, this is problem number one. A lot of what I just talked about was problem number two, right? The expenses growing faster than the revenues. It's an annual budget challenge. It is, and in our decisions, and I say this to the board in particular, and all of us as county officials, in our decisions on a day-to-day level, we need to be thinking in problem number two, the expenses growing faster than the revenues. We got to be thinking about how do we keep the expenses in check, right? How do we make sure that the expenses don't grow so fast because the revenue's only growing what it's growing. And the thing we have more control or ability to manage is on the expense side. So that has to constantly be in our minds as we're making decisions. So now we'll step back to problem number one. This is the chronic underfunding of basic core services, particularly public safety. So this shows you the Secure Rural Schools. This is the federal entitlement program. When logging on federal lands started to be restricted, the federal government stepped in at the early part of the turn of the century, around 2000, said, okay, we're going to put this entitlement program in place, and we're going to help make up the difference from some of those funds. And what you see here is in the shaded part, inflation adjusted, if you adjust to today's dollars, it goes back to 2000, right? 23, 24 years now. It's over $50 million a year. So just imagine, now between the road fund and the general fund is where you see these dollars being split. Today we get somewhere in the range of $10 million, so roughly $5 million in each. It's maybe 4 and 6, something in that range. We get about $10 million in either harvest or SRS, whichever is better. But imagine if we had another $40 to $50 million, what we could do and what we would do with our public safety system, with other general government services that we have. This is really the root of, well, it's not the root of the problem. This is, the federal government stepping in and saying, here's an entitlement program, and then inevitably realizing that there's not a lot of counties that are in this situation, and Congress, Washington, D.C. doesn't really, other than our delegation absolutely advocates for these fundings, but this is not a program that we foresee coming, it's not coming back. So we've been stuck in this place. You can go to the next slide. So that was the federal government's sort of temporary solution to help bridge a gap. This is the core of the problem, and you see the permanent property tax rates. So this is the 5, Lane County on the far left, and then the 5 counties that we compare to. We usually show you the 36 counties in Oregon, and Lane County is the 7th lowest. Just decide to stop doing that, because it's like, it's us and Josephine and Coos and Curry hanging out at the bottom of the list. And it kind of begs, well, like, what do we have in all respect, but we don't have a lot in common in terms of the population or the set of services or the urban-rural mix or the geographic size to Josephine, Coos, and Curry. We have a lot more in common with Jackson, Washington, Deschutes, Marion, Clackamas. Those are our comparables. When we bargain with our bargaining units, those are the comparables we use. Similar population size, urban areas, mix of urban and rural. Even having said this, none of these counties are exactly like Lane County. They're not, none of them are the geographic size, actually, that Lane County is. Maybe Jackson, I don't know if Jackson is, but they also don't have the urban population. But the bottom line here is that our permanent property tax rate is nowhere close to any of these. It's actually the same as Deschutes, but Deschutes added a couple of permanent public safety rates that fund their whole public safety system. So when you add that on top, they're the third the third highest of these. So this is the difference, that when we compare ourselves to these 5 other counties, but we don't have the funding, the discretionary funding, even close to what these 5 other counties have. Okay, you can go to the next one. The way that Deschutes County funds its public safety system is probably a good example. I think if you talk to our sheriff and DA and other public safety officials in Lane County, maybe other parts of the state, they'd say that's the ideal model, if you could have a permanent funding source for that, for your public safety services. It doesn't necessarily mean that Lane County property taxpayers, particularly in the urban areas and the incorporated areas, pay less than those other counties, because, you're still paying the school districts 47 cents on the dollar goes to the school districts, 32 cents on the dollar goes to cities, and then fire districts and other special districts. Lane County gets 11 cents on the dollar. So that's the story. And then this last slide here, this is we used to show the kind of the spin wheel of the public safety system. This is, in another way, shows you what the public safety, the idea here is that the public safety system is a system. If you fund one part of it really well, or even just adequately, that one piece will function adequately, but the whole system doesn't work, right? It's like you've oiled one part of the gears, but the rest of them are rusted and aren't moving right. So you have to oil the whole system. And if you look at the different pieces, from policing to corrections, prosecution, the court system, the supervision side, parole and probation, and then of course the mental health and housing and treatment related, you have to have all of those pieces well oiled for the system to work well. The board heard this morning from our human services department that talked about, the board was given incredible numbers on the extent to which Lane County's actually exceeded what the benchmarks that were put in place for the all-in program, the state program, state funding that was made available for emergency shelter and housing that Governor Kotek put in shortly after taking office and structured this program. And of course, Lane County led the way, was the first one to submit a plan, was the first one to have its plan adopted. And now we see numbers that are 100, 115, 120%, 130% or more of what the goal was. We've far exceeded those things. So, and I think the comment, I don't know who on the board made this comment, one of the commissioners said, or maybe it was our HNHS director, Eve Gray, said, our team is doing incredible work, and our partners in the community, you heard one of our staff say, it's been incredible to see how the partners have come together and are really working well to solve. This is one of the things we do well in Lane County, through the public safety system, through the human service system. We collaborate really well. When we do that, we can solve really great challenges. The problem, as it relates to the unhoused population, is that we don't have enough housing. So we know that we are doing a great job at getting everyone housed that we possibly can. We just don't have the stock of housing to get everyone into housing that we need to. So, this is an indicator, I think, of, again, we have a chronically underfunded public safety system in certain parts. The system is jammed. We need to get more oil. Whatever analogy you want to connect here into the system, and it's I guess easier said than done. I think the last thing I want to, we're a little ahead of schedule, so if you have, I'm gonna make a few more comments, and if you have questions for me before we go to Christine's, we can do that. I wanted to end on a little bit of a positive note, if you will. When I'm reflecting on when I came here 10 years ago, and I've shared this story with people, before, when I was interviewing for the job, and there were people from outside the community said, "Oh, I wouldn't go there, they challenges, and they don't have enough money, to do things. I would never do." And I'm like, well, let's see, let's see how the people are. And I remember coming here and meeting with people in the organization, and yes, funding challenges, and yes, there were some, the organization was reeling from some things, but deeply committed, deeply passionate people at every level of the organization doing incredible work. And so our job, I've sort of felt like part of my role, along with the board and the leaders in our organization, is to lift that up. Let's really create clarity around what makes our people great. We talk a lot about our 3 core behaviors: a passion to serve, a drive to connect. What's the third one?
Focus on solutions.
Okay. Next time I want it louder. I tell this story about how we came up with those. It wasn't a group of, managers sitting in a room going, oh, how do we want our people to behave? We had a conversation about who are the best people in our organization. When they're at their best, what are the behaviors that they're exhibiting? We extracted those behaviors from the people that are here. All we did is create clarity around them and said, these are the things we most value. These are the behaviors that we most value. And those values are what create culture. Whatever your value, whatever the behaviors are in an organization, for better or worse, that's what creates your culture. So we said, if we can distill that and reinforce it and lift it up and promote it, we'll reinforce the culture really that we want to see. And Lane County has a long history of having a culture of resilience. And I think we've moved into a culture of innovation. When you think about programs like the All-In program, I didn't mention one of the really good proposals that we have in the budget is the deflection program. And this is an example of innovation. We sat in the room when Alex Kyler was still with us as our legislative affairs manager, and Steve Adams, and we brought, all our public safety officials together, the sheriff and the DA and community justice and HNHS and everyone, and we said, all right, well, the legislature is going to amend probably Measure 110. There's pressure to do that. Let's get at the forefront of what we want this to look like. And so we had these conversations about what do we want to advocate for. And we developed a framework. And, whether or not the legislature adopted what we suggested because it's what we suggested, who knows? But the system they put in place is largely what we advocated for. And we have a plan, and we have and in the budget you see a deflection program that has been created in partnership with our public safety officials. It's landed in our Community Justice and Rehabilitation Services Department. I don't know if I'm at liberty to publicly say who we're hiring to lead that effort, but I think there'd be a chorus of cheers when you become aware of that. So I use that as an example along with our All-In program. And so much of the work that's happening in Lane County is innovative. It's at the forefront, despite the limitations on funding that we have available to us. There's just incredible work that continues to happen in our organization. And I hope that our departments share, because every department has it. And so I want to encourage folks to share that as part of your their department discussions about really the creative, innovative, leading work that's happening. We have really incredible people in our organization, top to bottom, that are called on by state and national groups all the time because of the work that they're doing. I mean, it's all over. And I'm not saying that to pump up and I'm saying it because it's just that we should be really proud of the work that's happening here. And the thing that we're really working on now and we're very committed to is, we've talked about culture of resilience, we've talked about culture of innovation, and we really want to invest in fostering this culture of belonging. Our world is riddled with conflict. It's everywhere. You turn on the news and you just see conflict all over. And we see that happening in our state and in our local community and even in our organization, right? There's kind of othering, and fighting, turf battles around things. But we do our best work when we come together and we focus on solutions. We work together. We realize that actually we have more things in common. This sounds like sort of a trip, but we do. We have more things in common than we do things that separate us. We have people that, different backgrounds, races, religions, ethnicities, cultures, sexual orientations, and we want to recognize and acknowledge those differences, but embrace our shared humanity. And the fact that we are all here in Lane County as an organization to serve the people in our community, many of whom are most in need in our community. And so that's a big, broad sort of statement, but when we talk about this idea of a culture of belonging, it's really creating a place where everybody has a voice. There might be majority voices and minority voices, but all those voices should be listened to and heard. We need to respect all the different the shared humanity that we bring to this work. So I think, and I'm really proud of the work. I had an opportunity, some of these comments are reflective of a recent training I had the opportunity with a small group of Lane County officials from different parts of the organization, participated in the Othering and Belonging Institute's training around this topic. And it was very impactful to us to understand the root of human conflict, and that, gosh, it's not just in this community, it's not just in this state, it's not just in this country, right? We're dealing with it all around the world. And maybe Little Lane County can be at the forefront of creating a place where everyone can feel a sense of, yeah, we have a lot of differences, but let's try to embrace those differences as much as anything and focus on the common causes that we have. So that's it, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions, a little ahead of time. Otherwise, you can go to Christine.
Do we have questions for Steve? Commissioner Buck?
Thank you, Chair. I do have one question. We had the slide up on the SRS money and how we kind of leveled off around $10 million, and it went through calendar year 2024. I just want to clarify, the budget that we have presented in front of us for the next year does not include any future SRS funding because it has not been obligated. So that 10 million is now zero in this budget.
You can answer, why don't you start, and then I have a comment to that too.
Okay, not zero, because we will go back to timber harvest sharing. So the general fund will receive 50% of the receipts from the BLM timber harvest occurring on the ONC lands, and then the road fund and our school fund, which is pass-through money, receive money from the National Forest. The general fund number stays right about the same. Harvest has been right about what we're getting with Secure Rural Schools. The road fund, school fund will go dramatically down. So that one, we expect about 1.5 million. It's a 7-year rolling average. It's a little harder to predict. And it typically gets about 6 million when we're receiving SRS.
So what is the net deduction?
So
From what we
between
see,
those, I mean,
yeah, from what we
if
see
the payment
there.
is what we project, because again, now it's based on something occurring, it's not a guaranteed amount like what we had under SRS, then you're looking at about, what did I just say, 4 and 5.5, so you're losing 4.5 million or so.
Thank
But
you.
you make a point that, and I didn't mention this, so I appreciate you bringing this question up, Commissioner, that one of the strategic decisions we made several years ago, you might remember which year it was, but it was somewhere in the last, 5-6 years or so, was to say we need to wean ourselves off of reliance on the Secure Rural Schools funding as an ongoing revenue source. Because we were dealing with these years of yes, our congressional delegation is advocating for us, but we don't know if we're going to get a renewal to this or not. So that is one of the things that we've done and we've used some of these resources when I talked about the 2 funds for enhancing rural public safety, rural patrols in Lane County. We use some of those funds that we put into that because we're viewing the SRS dollars that we do receive as one-time money. It's not an ongoing, because we don't know how long it's going to be renewed for. And I think that's it was a smart move and a good decision that we made, that we're not relying on those funds to balance the budget, because we know that, they may or may not come.
It's like 16, 17 or 17, 18.
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions for Steve? Steve, can I ask you a quick one?
Please.
When you talked about that we're not using reserves, that's great, and I think this is the right sheet, and it shows approximately 33 million in reserves, is that correct?
Yes.
On a county our size, what is the gold standard of what should be held in reserve?
The board's policy, and Christine can talk about this, the board's policy is approximately 20%. So it's not the dollar amount depends on the size of the fund, but it's typically a percentage of the budget. And then we break down the reserve. We say our financial policy is 20% for emergency reserve and we call it stabilization and emergency reserve. You need to have enough cash on hand for a certain period of time to deal with, fluctuations in revenue collection, those types of things. And then any revenue in advance of that amount is what we say, could be used for for balancing the budget or for some other one-time expense. But all of those dollars that you identified either are within the 20% number and/or allocated towards some one-time expense that we already have. For example, we have some ARPA dollars, that we've dedicated for specific things. For example, a stabilization center, those dollars haven't been spent yet, but they have been set aside for that dedicated purpose. You want to say
I
anything?
might just add, that's the general fund reserve that you're seeing there, absent the ARPA projects that he's talking about. It has an asterisk down in there telling you it's not including the sub-fund. We created a sub-fund to kind of track those ARPA projects that have already been committed to. But I would say with our funds in general, that's the general fund policy is what he was talking about, the 20, at minimum of 20%. It really depends on the fund. So our road fund, which has bridges and roads to maintain and something could happen in an emergency, has more like a 40% reserve. It really depends, rather than like setting a policy, which used to exist, of like every fund has to have at least 5%, we want to look at what the needs of that specific fund are. And so we have those conversations while they're building the budget to make sure that there's enough for cash flow, for emergencies, for anything special for that fund.
Thank you. So I knew there was you could explain it very well. Thank you. Any other questions for Christina or Steve?
This is the problem with my approach this year, that I'm so proud of myself. This is what I was going to say. Just 5 things in 45 minutes, but I forgot to say one of them. And that is just to, I talked about the problem number 1, the financial problem number 1, the historic underfunding. And I just wanted to, the board knows this, but I want to share with the whole budget committee that the board has created a public safety funding task force that is comprised of 11 individuals. The board has made appointments, and then we have a team of public safety folks who've made additional appointments. So 11 individuals. They met 2 weeks ago in the first kickoff meeting. They'll meet again this Friday. The sheriff is going to be presenting on his budget to that group. So we have this group that is looking at this question of what do we do about the long-term kind of chronic underfunding of the public safety system. So I want to note that. I also want to note that we have our assessor, Mary Vuksat Schaefer, is actively working, has been working, worked in the short session and continues to work on advocacy for the CAFA funding, that's state dollars that we receive. Just a few years ago, I don't know if it was 10 years ago, is that like less than 10 years ago, the state funded over 20% of assessment taxation. Now they fund about 11% of it. So we just have seen the state dollars decrease and decrease. And remember, we have 85, I think, 85 taxing districts that we do all the appraisals for all the properties in Lane County. We value the rolls, and then we collect all the taxes for all those 85, and then we remit the taxes to all those other entities. We keep 11 cents on the dollar for county services. We do all that at no cost to the other districts. They pay nothing for that service. The state pays about 11% of the cost, and who pays the rest? Lane County has to carve it out, right? We carve it out of the other services we would otherwise fund, public safety or other things, to do that statutory requirement. It's a state function that the state has said counties you need to do, but the state isn't funding it. So Mary's, continues to be pounding the drum and saying, we need to fix this problem. You'll hear more again about the Community Corrections Act funding. I think that's probably one that we're kind of keeping our fingers crossed and a little hopeful that we're going to see a little bit of positive movement on that front. So there's really good things happening to try to address these issues of the chronic underfunded piece outside of our budget process. And I want to appreciate folks for that. And certainly you can hear more about that in the department meetings. Okay, that's it, I think. Now I did my 5.
Thank you, Steve. Christina, your turn, I believe.
Thank you, Chair Weber, Budget Committee. So I'm here to provide you with an overview of the entire budget, and then we'll dig into the general fund just a little bit. And of course, you'll be hearing a lot of details from departments. So starting off, we will just talk a little bit about the, where we are in our budget process, why we're here, what the budget committee does. And I realize we have a pretty experienced budget committee, but just remembering that the public is watching this meeting too. So some of this, yes, I do repeat it every year, but somebody new won't have this information. So we are in phase 2 of our budget process here, where the budget committee is going to approve a budget. You've received the county administrator's proposed budget. We will then go on to having the board adopt the budget, and then we amend the budget through the year. We have about 4 supplemental budgets as things change. Next slide. So the budget cycle, the responsibilities, the roles and responsibilities in those different phases. So we've just come out of budget development, so budget office and departments, and then the county administrator have built the budget for you. County administrator with the proposed specifically. And then the budget committee, the 10 of you, will approve the budget, the board adopting. When we're talking about budget execution, the spending of the budget and the amending, then that does involve all of the departments as well as central budget office and then the Board of Commissioners. And then, of course, at the end of the year after we've spent all of our budget, we come to the auditing phase. So financial services, which is in our county administration operations division, works on that, and of course in conjunction with departments, and we hire an external financial auditor who comes in and audits. And one of the things checking, of course, is how did we compare to our budget? We've built this budget, how did we then spend the budget? So what the budget committee does, you're receiving the budget document. So tonight, hearing the budget message, you're going to hear and consider public comment. So we have a required public hearing that has to happen. That will be this evening. And then we also receive public comment prior to your deliberation on the last night. Has been something Lane County does. You discuss and can revise the budget as needed before you approve it. And then approving the property tax rates is, of course, an important piece of what the budget committee does. Oregon Department of Revenue was mentioned at the bottom of that slide. They're responsible for interpreting budget law, and they do all of the training for every jurisdiction out there that's collecting property taxes and has to abide by budget law. Just mentioning that the proposed budget document is made public at the time that the budget committee receives it. So when you had your pre-meeting last week, that's also the point where we put the document online so that it became public. And then they have a right to come in and see copies of anything that you are seeing. We post everything online at our budget website, or there's also one of the binders that you all have up front of county administration that the public can come in and inspect. We keep that up to date as we give you materials. So this is just a bit about the budget message itself, the things that it includes. So you've heard those pieces. You've got financial policies in the document, and we're explaining changes to you that's happening year to year, so focusing on that. We mentioned the public comment, so we have published that there's a public hearing tonight. So if there is anyone wanting to speak, and this is just about the process that Lane County typically follows to hold those. Again, discussing and revising the budget. So you're going to hear presentations from most of our departments. So the budget committee, those of you who have been on the committee for a few years will remember that we really tried to streamline what you're hearing. There was the budget committee requesting that you mainly focus on things that are changing, where you need to make some kind of consideration. So not just hearing about things that are always staying the same. You do have every department represented in the budget document, and everyone talking about the things they've accomplished or concerns that they might have for the coming year. But the presentations will be a little more focused for you. And here's just when you approve the budget, you will have motions, as you all know, that evening. Approving the entire budget. We record the minutes, of course. And then I think the next one shows the motion where you're going to approve the tax rates for the different, our permanent rate. We have extension service, a parks levy, and our public safety levy. All right, now we'll get into some numbers. So the 24-25 budget is just over 1.1 billion in size. That is a 7.1% decrease from the current revised budget. in the current year. As mentioned, there's 33 funds. So this pie shows you all of those funds that have appropriations in them. You're not meant to read every fund name there. This is in your document, but just to give you an idea of the size of the different funds in the pie. The dark blue, which we will pull out further in as we go through this presentation, is the general fund, so the one to the top right. So by fund type, there's fund types that are actually defined in budget law, and then you have multiple funds within these different types, except for the general fund. There is one general fund, but we have general funds, special revenue funds, we have debt service funds, we have a capital fund, enterprise funds. Enterprise is going to be more like the solid waste fund and land management. Lane Event Center, they operate a little more like a business, self-sufficient with their fees. Internal service funds, that's where we're collecting and distributing money internally, such as our technology services department is in an internal service fund providing services to other departments. And then we have one fiduciary fund which contains a legacy benefit called retiree medical. And you'll hear a little bit about that. So restricted versus discretionary, as you can see, the special revenue fund is definitely restricted. Most of the other funds are restricted except for that general fund. So giving you an idea of size within the general fund itself, which is 188 million, 105.8 is what we term discretionary general fund. So that is the money that comes into the county that is not tied to a department activity, but is more like, well, except for property taxes, is obviously tied to assessment and taxation, so I always correct that. But the property taxes come into a non-departmental budget along with the timber receipts or secure rural schools, some of our state shared revenue, and it's that 105 million that we're then allocating out to departments. So you'll hear us refer to that discretionary general fund. That's the number that we're referring to. And it's 9.4% of the entire county budget. Go ahead. Thanks, Jennifer. I know it's hard clipping through slides when you're not the one talking. So our FTE, oh, and there, I missed a 23, 24. It's supposed to say 24, 25 at the top. You look at it and you look at it and then you miss one. All right, total proposed FTE, 2,059, a decrease of 14.25 from the current year. So we're showing you the FTE here by service category. You'll see on your service option sheets, we break those down by service category as well. You'll see some other charts in the budget document. And then also pointing you to a couple places within your proposed document where you can see this similar information. It's not on a chart, but similar information by service category on page 414, and then historical changes over time of at least 10 years also in your appendix of your document. So some of the terminology, back to a little bit of the basics. You'll hear us talk about revenue and resources. Revenue being the new money coming in, basically, whereas resources are going to be your fund balance that you're not spending, your reserves from the prior year that you're bringing forward. They're a resource to the organization, but they're not revenue. The same on the requirements versus expenditures side. Expenses under budget law are defined as personnel, material and services, capital, and debt service. But we have things like transfers between funds and our reserves, and sometimes an unappropriated ending fund balance, although typically Lane County puts our money into reserves rather than not appropriating it. And then I won't read through all of these. This slide deck will be available. But these are also terms you'll hear us talk about: appropriation, meaning that it's available to spend, the different definitions for those expenditures that I just talked about, and getting down into contingency and reserve. How the budget is built, like Steve mentioned, you hear the one big number, the 1.1 billion, but really it's about the funds that are in the budget, the 33 funds that have to each balance on their own, and the fund is really at the top, and then you put departments inside of a fund, and then you put the expenses within those departments inside of the department. So that's just how it flows, and so we're balancing all of those individual bottom lines for the funds. This goes into those pieces of what is an expenditure and what is a requirement. And the reason I point this out is that you will see in the department, so on the left-hand side there under expenditures, what you will see in department budgets in your document is going to be personnel, material and services, and capital. That's what's appropriated to a department. There are also reserves and debt service and other pieces that are not inside of a department budget, they're inside of the fund budget. So the non-departmental section of your document will talk about things like fund balance for all of our funds, reserves for all of our funds, all of the transfers. That's where you see kind of those big numbers that go across the funds. And as we know, a balanced budget means that your resources equal your requirements. That's the legal requirement that we have to meet every year, is that the budget balances. The step that we go a step further is we also look to whether our funds are structurally balanced, meaning that there's ongoing revenue to support the ongoing expenses. So here's the list of the funds that are not structurally balanced in the current proposed budget that you have. So we have our Health and Human Services Fund, which was mentioned. The second one is the Intergovernmental Human Services Fund, also within Health and Human Services. Our Parole and Probation Sub-Fund, that's the community corrections money that Steve was referring to. Our Public Safety Levy Fund is no longer structurally balanced. It relies on property taxes. So it's really not surprising that over time, when the rate stays the same, it will eventually not be structurally balanced because expenses grow faster than property tax rates. And our Land Management Fund is not structurally balanced at this time. It is getting closer. So they have plans in the works for there to get it back into balance, but it is still slightly structurally imbalanced in 24-25. So here's some comparison of this is revenue categories. Year to year, the blue bar at the top is the budget we're going into, 24-25, and the red is the current budget. So you can see places where the top one being state revenue, next year's budget is going to be lower. A lot of this, and then federal revenue too, a lot of this is that one-time money that came into the county's budget related to COVID-19 and the ARPA funds that we received and other state funds that we received. There are places where we see modest increases, internal fees and charges, external fees, even a little bit. The interdepartment reimbursements, kind of right in the middle, which has a very dramatic change, is the spend down of the ARPA funds that's occurring in the current year. So we were tracking that internally between our departments. And so that's, there's a little bit of video lottery still being counted as interdepartment reimbursements and some Title III funds. So that's why you see a little bit still there next year. All right. The other resources, these are county-wide numbers again. Fund balance across all of our funds is going down slightly. Transfers between our funds is going up a little. That increase in transfers is primarily due to our capital fund receiving more money. So as capital projects happen, departments transfer money into the capital fund. So that's a bit cyclical. You'll see it go up and down over the years. Intra-fund transfers within the same fund, but maybe across departments, is when you'll see those intra-fund transfers happening. On the expenditure side, much shorter list here: material and services, personnel, capital, and debt. So material and services is actually going down from the current year. Personnel going up slightly. Capital going down as a county overall, even if there's more capital projects in our capital fund. And debt, you see a decrease, even though our debt payments typically, unless we pay one off, typically our debt payments grow a little bit over time, but we're actually seeing in 24-25, one of those strategic moves that the county made years ago was we prepaid 1 year of our PERS bond because it was callable. So we are finally hitting that year where it was paid off. Internally, we smooth our PERS bond rates, so there's not a big dip in expenses happening, but we continue to lower that bond rate, and that PERS bond will be paid off here in a few years. And here's the other requirements. So the other side of the transfers, these are the same numbers you see on the resources side. Same thing with the intra-fund transfers, but contingencies and reserves. So these are the county-wide numbers about what is contained in all of our funds for both contingencies and reserves. And then giving you the page numbers of where you can read a little bit more about that. In particular, there's a page in the document for reserves, which we say is page 93, where you're going to be able to see what are the restrictions on those reserves. Because the thing to remember about reserves is they carry the same restrictions as the revenue when it went into the fund. So letting you know what's in that fund and does it have restrictions attached to it. So you'll see a little more information in a chart there that's a little too difficult to show on a PowerPoint here. Speaking about the reserve number, why do we have them? We talked about this a little bit from the question that was asked. We have to have cash flow. A great example is in the general fund itself, where we rely on property taxes, which are not paid until middle of November. So we start paying our bills on July 1st, and so we have to have cash available to not go negative while we wait for our property taxes to come in. It impacts our bond rating to have higher reserves or have a consistent and a policy of reserves. They compare us to other like jurisdictions when they're looking at our reserve rates. There's times where we need to purchase future equipment. We're saving up over time instead of having a bill come at one point. We save up over a number of years in order to purchase those things. And then we do have what we refer to as a service stabilization reserve. It's a piece of our reserve in the general fund, and I think in the road fund they refer to it as an asset stabilization. So having some funds available in case something happens with the economy or some great need where you can pull from your reserves to temporarily keep a service stable or fix an asset. So revenue fluctuations. All right, into the general fund a little bit more. So this is our general operating fund of the county. So the services contained in it, you see them listed in your service option sheets. Public safety being a big one. We also have assessment and taxation, which falls under the general government. Elections, public health, animal services, property management. Our central services, such as finance, county administration, and county council are also within the general fund. About 30 to 35% of the county FTE is supported by the general fund, either in the general fund or receiving a transfer of general fund to support it. Here's that same pie that you saw earlier, but with the slice of the general fund pulled out. To give you an idea, the 188 million, and it currently has 520 FTE, or will on July 1st. So there is a section in your budget document just on general fund. You have the service option sheets in your binder. They will be also posted online. So that's where we, on those service option sheets, are accounting for those discretionary general fund dollars, the 105 million that I referred to. And then you'll see it within department sections, where the department sections will tell you which funds they are budgeting expenses in, so you will see the general fund appear in places as well. The split between when we talk again about that discretionary general fund number versus department activity, about 69% of the revenue coming into the general fund is the discretionary general fund. The rest is going to be department activity. Here, I'm showing again that discretionary number broken out by the service categories where it's being allocated. So this pie chart does not contain reserves, which are just static, but instead focuses on the areas where money is going to be spent and allocated next year. So public safety using the large majority of the discretionary general fund at almost 74%. General government is next at just over 14%. Our public health and welfare is 10.9, and then there's a little sliver in non-departmental. So I did kind of give you comparisons from the adopted budget to this proposed budget there. The public safety is actually going up slightly. Public health and welfare is going down. General government is also going down. Non-departmental is slightly going up. The piece that's going up in non-departmental, because that really just contains like countywide dues, but the piece that's going up is the public safety task force that's been mentioned. There's a consultant that's been hired, so that is the slight bump up there. So in the general fund, some resource and requirement changes to highlight for you. Property tax growth is being projected at 3.5%. Our assessor helps us with those projections for next year. The fund balance, the beginning fund balance of the fund is going down year over year by 5.8 million. That is the general fund transferring some one-time money for that Community Corrections Act funding being short. And then the prior year, current year, structural imbalance and the spending of reserves that's happened in the past. So that's the change year over year. Administrative charges, those are our central services that are charged out to departments. And so that is going up. I didn't put a percent there, but you can see those in your charts in the general fund section as well. We'll talk about administrative charges. Fund transfers, some of that expanded patrol that you heard about is in the general fund receiving a transfer from the road fund, that Secure Rural Schools. So that's some of the bigger transfers coming in there. And I already mentioned that interdepartmental reimbursements that the American Rescue Plan funds have been spent down in the current year. And so we're seeing that change there. Personnel services, if there are approved cost of living increases or market changes, those are being budgeted, as well as step increases for existing employees if they are not at the top step of their range. Material and services in the general fund is actually only increasing 0.6%. A lot of that is because of the reductions that have occurred in the general fund. So we typically, when we start out, you might remember from leadership team, we talked about trying to meet what Oregon projects will be the CPI growth, but we came in lower than that because of the reductions. There's fund transfers that happen that go out of the general fund into Health and Human Services, some into the Sheriff's Office, Animal Services. We've set some money aside for elections equipment, and then that Community Corrections Act shortfall is a transfer that's going out in this current year as well. The reserves, I mentioned there what the policy is, so the 20% minimum policy. They are decreasing just slightly year over year. And then mentioning the things that we have some special reserves for. We have a little bit of the patrol reserve left that the general fund it's only a couple thousand, I think, because as was mentioned, it's ending at the end of 24-25. There's about 1.5 million for Navigation Center Operations Reserve. And then there's additional reserves in the sub-fund related to those ARPA projects. And that's something that you will get a handout from us, hopefully on Thursday, to kind of detail for you, okay, what's in that sub-fund and what are the projects that have been allocated to. So here's just a very short summary of the reductions that happened in the general fund because of the structural imbalance. So you'll hear about these in the department sections as well, but just thought I would put them on a slide, and again, doesn't talk about impacts. This really is just a very short description and an amount, but showing that the departments that do receive general fund or rely on general fund, and so what their amounts, or if there were FTE involved, and the classification that's being reduced in some cases. The one thing I will point out is that once you get to emergency management down, those are central services. And so even though these are, at the moment when you look at the budget, they are dollar for dollar reductions, that will not be the case when we bill out this budget. What I mean by that is general fund pays about 20% of central services. The rest of the funds pay the other 80%. When we cut $1 out of central services, by the time we go bill that out, the general fund will see a 20-cent savings, and then the other funds will see the rest of the savings. So that won't hold over time, but just pointing out that there were reductions in central services as well. And then tech services, technology services, I'll mention, is not in the general fund, but Bill's general fund services. And so they also took a reduction even after they had built in some reductions as they built their rates, but they reduced another FTE and right about 200,000 as we built the proposed budget. So a little on the structural balance, sometimes imbalance. So leadership team, you heard us talk about that there was a projected structural imbalance. So that was the estimate in January, was right about that 7 million. We then had departments enter the budget. I think we talk about that at leadership team. Then we're going to test the forecast and see what our departments saying their revenues are going to be. Largely because of a little bit higher revenue, by the time that department entry was done, the shortfall was less. So that took care of some of it. We then looked at the things like vacancy variance. We're assuming 5.5% vacancy variance in the general fund. And then there were reductions made that you've heard about in order to bring the fund into balance. So just giving you an idea of how we did that over time. It was some slightly stronger revenue than we projected, and then some very deliberate, here's what the vacancy variance is going to be, and here's what the reductions are going to be. It's also important to note what this does not include. So we are currently in bargaining with several of our employee unions and groups, and those wage adjustments, because they have not been finalized and approved by the Board of Commissioners, are not in the 24-25 budget. There's not an assumption about what those will be. So as soon as those contracts are finalized, and I mentioned the groups there, then there will be more expense in the general fund and our other funds. So the first three, really, AFSCME General, AFSCME Nurses, and Prosecuting Attorneys will all increase expenses in the general fund. Probation officers will be in that parole and probation sub-fund that I mentioned. There also, sorry, one more thing, Jennifer. There's some one-time, I called it savings, but maybe it was just how we worked to balance the budget that are in the 24-25 budget. Things like our health insurance rates. You'll hear that they went up about, the cost of providing medical insurance to our employees is increasing about 10% year over year. But because we have reserves in our medical sub-fund, we increased departments' rates by only 7.5%. Because we always are looking to make sure our reserve levels are staying appropriate, that they're not too high at a time that we would be increasing expenses to departments. What that means is those reserves are gone because we're spending them in 24-25. So when we come to 25-26, we will have to absorb the rest of that increase in addition to anything that happens in 25-26. We have a bit of the same thing happening in technology services where they had some one-time savings, and so rates to departments were held lower because that's what they need for next year, but they will be expected to go up. So a few places that we're watching, that's why we can say right now that 25-26 will have some difficulties, because we know we did some things in our financial management, which we should be doing, to make sure that we're smoothing rates and appropriately charging our departments, but it will increase expenses over time in some places. So the future cautions, wage growth continues to be more robust, the inflation of the last few years. So we are watching that. It also, I probably should have said personnel services here, which is the whole category, because things like PERS. So the 24-25 budget does not have an employer rate increase, but 25-26 will. We will, at the time, look at our last PERS bond that we issued and see whether we can internally adjust our rates to smooth things for departments, but we won't know more until we get closer. So those benefit rates continue to outpace our revenue growth as well. The services that were mentioned where we're relying on one-time funds. So the 12 FTE that have been mentioned in the sheriff's office that are expanded patrol in 2 different areas with one-time money. And then there's other limited duration positions across the organization. And of course, the service and community needs are not decreasing, they're increasing in many instances related to housing, behavioral health, and public safety. So the pressure on the expense side. And so in order to maintain the structural balance, we continue to work to refrain from spending one-time funds on anything that is ongoing, so that we make sure that we don't fall behind when we can't keep up with those wages and adding services. Just to remind the Budget Committee that we do have a capital improvement plan. So this is referring to last year's adopted plan. Oh, it says draft still for 24-28. I didn't catch that word, but we're developing the draft plan for next year. So the board, we started draft CIP in the fall, go through the budget process, and the departments are finalizing that, and it'll come to the board in July or August. And so just continuing to focus on our capital assets. We have aging capital assets. We also are building buildings or remodeling buildings. So just the costs associated with that, and that there is a plan that you can go out and look at the entire capital improvement plan if you have interest in that. And then just focusing on our foundational strengths, that through all of these challenges, the good things that are happening and the things that continue to give us the strength going forward is things like the strategic plan, the priorities, the key strategic initiatives. We have very strong financial policies. We're continually looking for whether we need to change, tweak something. Is there a new best practice out there? We have structural balance policy, our vacancy variance, and really planning those reserves, like I've talked about a couple times this evening, where we're trying to make sure we're having appropriate reserves, sometimes to smooth things over time so that we don't have the type of cliffs that used to be referred to when I started with the county, when we would have all of a sudden millions and millions of dollars go away and have to reduce services. Building of the community trust, so we have the public safety levy, which has been renewed a few times, and now we have the new parks levy that was passed by voters. And then you've heard about our people and organizational health, so a very high-skilled workforce that's very committed to providing the services to our residents. So next steps for your process, you have your calendar and schedule in front of you. We have work sessions starting on Thursday, so a few sessions of those where you're going to hear from departments. Pointing out to you again that on the May 16th work session, there is a placeholder in case the committee decides you want to know more about one of the departments, or one of them where we said we're being very focused and you're not hearing about somebody but you'd like to. Just let us know as soon as you have that thought. There is time that we could build that in. And then your deliberation and final budget approval is on May 22nd. That is a Wednesday. I mentioned before the meeting, I'm reminding myself too, after years of Thursday, but we're going to deliberate on Wednesday evening this year. The materials access, again, is your binders in front of you. Everything is on the website, so you can see everything under the meeting date, and giving you the link there, and of course the public info binder that's up in county administration. And the question answer process. So you will have note cards. I see them up on the dais there. If any questions come up that you don't get an answer to, or even if you know it's going to take staff more than just a moment to answer it, feel free to write those down. Michelle Stark in the budget office will collect those and send them out to departments, and then we make sure you all see the answers to every question as they come back in. Or feel free to email her too if you think of something outside of the meeting. And there's the link again on our website. So I'm open for any questions, comments.
Thank you, Christine. That was, wow. Any questions? Commissioner Trigger?
Thank you, Chair. We'll probably get to this later, but for the benefit of folks who might be watching, the FTE reduction of 14.25 is not necessarily that 14.25 people are leaving. Some of those are vacancy savings or people moving into other positions. So by my quick, when I look at reduction of existing position, if I added all those up, those are 9.3. Are those actual people? How does that reduction of existing position relate to the total FTE reduction?
Yeah, so a lot of them are vacant. So, I mean, some of it is in flux still because we are in May and it'll be July 1st if a position is actually eliminated. And there are what they refer to as bumping between classification. You know, if there's an office assistant that's vacant, somebody leaves between now and July, then somebody could move into that spot. So right now it looks like it will just be 2 to 3 potential. But again, that could change as far as employees. Versus positions. And you're right, you do all have the sheet that I think Commissioner Trigger's looking at that details the FTE changes. You know, we're giving you that sum number of 14.25, but it's a lot of, there's being adds in our community health center with the new center being opened in Cottage Grove. And there's little tweaks of FTE happening between positions. So it is a lot more than 14 positions being touched, to give you an idea there, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Level.
Thank you, Chair. How are you? Christine, yeah, great, awesome stuff. I mean, obviously you've done this a lot, you know what you're doing. I'm just curious, this is my second budget, so this is a little naivete on my part. What exactly are internal services? I mean, what does that encompass? What kind of jobs
So
are that in there?
this, or we call them central services also. So it's going to be county council, county administration, pieces of county administration, things like budget. The Board of Commissioners is considered a central service, supporting the entire organization. Human resources, technology services, although it bills through rates instead of our indirect plan. Finance, I'm forgetting some.
Facilities, I'd say
Thank you.
one of the
Yes.
biggest actually costs, because we've spent some time in the last year or so actually diving into the internal service costs. One of the biggest areas of costs is around facilities, because we have so many facilities and we need to maintain those facilities and pay for utilities and staff to clean and all those things. So actually one of the largest pieces, one of the largest non-technology pieces of central services is our facility costs.
So am I hearing that most of that internal, I mean, that's like $6 million, those kind of rough numbers in my head, that increased. Is that mostly due to employee costs of maintaining buildings and county council and admin and county commissioners raises due in January that I didn't vote for? So, I mean, is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yes, it would be increases over time. We also, not to get into the weeds of the indirect plan, but we bill out to our departments the last audited actuals. And that means we're looking back a couple years. So sometimes you'll hear departments talk about a 2-year lag until they are billed for the service they received. Or if we added an FTE, say in facilities, needed to add a custodian because of new buildings a couple years ago, they will get the bill in 2 years. So sometimes it's an add that already happened that's coming forward. So a little complex, but yes, increasing expenses or more staff, more service being provided, yeah.
I guess my last question, is there a way to explain that so the public can understand that? Not without getting, with getting into the weeds, I guess?
With which, just what's increasing it, you mean?
Right,
Or-
I love that we have an answer, but to me, that doesn't make it really much clearer in my mind of why it increased $6 million. I'm not really quite have a handle on that yet, and I'm wondering if the public's also in the same position I am of understanding that.
Yes, we could break it down by type, yeah. Like was mentioned, a lot of it's if a new building was added, so we can get to, hey, you've got more square footage, so that's what happened here. Yes, we do have some of that indirect plan. Michelle Stark has become our resident expert in the budget office to do the analysis, so we'd be happy to provide some of that.
Yeah, I think I'd like to know why it increased $6 million. Sure, thanks.
Other questions? Chair? Commissioner Seniga?
Yes, thanks, Chair. You, I have kind of two questions. So we have one-time funding for 12 FTE in the Sheriff's Department? I thought it was 3 or 4 from what you said up there. East Lane and West Lane, yeah, I don't, maybe the
That
sheriff
is
could help
4.
explain.
So West Lane so there were 2 different times that patrol was expanded, is what we referred to it as, expanded patrol. So the first time was we took $2 million from the road fund, $2 million from the general fund, and hired 4 deputies. So 2 in West Lane and 2 in East Lane. Mackenzie is what they refer to them as. Then a year later, when we got the last renewal of Secure Rural Schools, then the Secure Rural Schools money was divided between the sheriff's office and roads and bridges, and another 5-year expansion was created to do some more patrol and some investigations. So that included 5. I looked at it today, so I'm seeing if I remember. 5 deputies and a sergeant in the patrol side, and then 2 deputy detectives in investigation. And that was another 5 years. And so because it happened the next year, that's why it's going to last a year longer. They both were 5 years in total, yeah.
Okay. When and all that sunsets within the next couple of years?
Yes.
One at the end of next fiscal year, and the other at the end of the following fiscal. So one at the end of 24, 25, and one at the end of 25, 26. And, we don't typically do that, right? I mean, you've heard us beat the drum for 10 years on one-time money for one-time expenses, but this was the rationale really was we do 5-year levies, right? We do a 5-year levy to that supports a significant amount of correction services in the jail. And so the feeling was, well, if we can pull together some of this one-time SRS funds and do a 5-year, then, and we're explicit about it, and we're very clear to say we're going to fund this for 5 years, but at the end of 5 years, we're going to have to come up with some of the, so that's why we did, through the budget process. I think it would have been 3 or 4 years ago now.
Okay. And you said internal services TS was in that?
They are, yeah. They're not in the indirect plan, but yes, they are a central service that supports all of the rest of the county, yeah.
But then, like, a couple slides later,
They're-
it said TS took a $200,000 hit in one FTE.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I want to back up just a little bit too, because we're kind of at this point where we're talking about public safety and the perception of the public. The last poll that I looked at just last week, 84% of the people in the state of Oregon don't feel safe. And Mr. Mokrajewski, you said that a budget reflects our values and strategy, that values create culture. I don't know if we're going to be able to create much of a culture going forward in Lane County if we can't keep our citizens safe. So this really concerns me about why or how we're going to add the highest value to our community, and that's to keep our people safe. Is there a breaking point? I mean, you said there's a cliff that we all come upon that was in the past, but I think we're there now about we need to really prioritize what we absolutely value top of the priority list. And to me, that's keeping our people safe. So what has to sunset for a while so we can make sure our citizens are safe? That's the question I put out. Maybe that's not an answer for tonight, but that's my concern.
One of the, what you don't have the ability to see in the hour and a half that we've been in here is the countless hours that we spent not just meeting with various departments, but requesting information. We did ask everyone to submit, that received general funds, to submit up to 6% reduction packages, because we wanted to see what the impacts would be. And then we met with each department, right? So we had a shortfall, and we said, everyone who receives general fund, show us what 6% looks like, a 6% reduction. Then we had those individual conversations, and we did the hard work to really dive in and say, what am I, at the end of the day, willing to put forward to the budget committee to deal with this problem that we have that is reasonable and responsible. What you received is that, specifically, you bring up the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office took a 0.6% reduction compared to most other departments that took a 5 to 6% reduction. So there was a lot more on the table that you don't have in front of you, because frankly, we didn't want to put those reductions. I was not comfortable bringing those reductions forward to the board. So I want to share that just as context, that you have in front of you what you have, but understand that it is a reflection of a lot. It is not across the board. There are areas that are taking much more significant reductions than other areas. And so I do think that it was a reflection of trying to really understand, one, where do we have the ability to make some reductions that will limit the impact, try to hit that target of getting a structurally balanced budget, but also not further eroding in areas that we know are really critical. The reason the numbers look the way they do is, the sheriff's office is 44% of discretionary general fund, right? So it's the largest portion. Public safety represents 74% of discretionary general fund. So, I want to be sure that and I think we can talk about the impacts that are in front of you, and it's important for the budget committee to understand what the impacts are of those, and there are impacts, but I think it would be good to hear from departments before presuming sort of what an impact may or may not be.
I will maybe just mention also your service option sheets. I'll just point you back to those as well. Those were a tool that was developed back when we were making budget reductions. And so it has a lot of information on there about things like mandates or other leveraging other funds. So shows kind of the mix of everything.
Ready? Okay. Did you have more?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, well, you can if you do, if you want to, that's fine. Does anybody else have any questions for Steve or Christina? All right, I see none. We're now past our time frame, which I assume we were supposed to do a break, which I'm not sure we need to do that, but we do have to come to the public hearing portion soon.
5 minutes?
5 minutes?
Do we,
Go ahead.
Chair, if I could suggest, since we're after the time the public hearing was to start, to see if there's anyone who wishes to give comment, and if there's a long list, we might take a couple minutes, but if there isn't, then taking a
think
break
that
to
is a
come back
great
to
idea.
adjourn is maybe not, yeah.
Is there anybody in the queue or anybody here?
Who's managing the online? Is there anyone?
All those people didn't show up that we invited.
Okay, so there is no public comment?
Do you need to open it? You can, yeah, maybe open it.
Do we need to open it for public comment?
Is anyone here that'd like to make comment, and then close it if you don't.
Okay. Is there anyone in the audience or online that would like to make a public comment? All right, seeing none, we will close the public comment period. And I think that pretty much does it for this evening. Is that correct?
Unless you have other questions.
Oh, do we want to?
Committee business, if there's anything you want to talk about in terms of the process or presentations that you'd like to hear that aren't otherwise identified.
Herb?
Yes, I'm not sure whether we still have it, but historically there was a process for public requests, and I'm not sure whether that process still exists, but does it exist? And if so, was there anything? I'm hoping not, but with the funding shortfalls, but.
Your wish is granted. So there is still a process. We put the form out on our website, and we did not receive any community requests.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else anybody has? Any other committee business? All right, then we will adjourn for this evening, and we'll be back here at 1 o'clock on Thursday. Is that correct? Well, upstairs. Thank you, everyone, for attending.